I'm a country boy. I'm from West Virginia. I don't know nothing about this big time stuff. I never even asked to be big. I wanted to be effective, not famous. Famous is the consequences of being effective. I didn't know nothing about being famous and I didn't like it. And so there I was, and when you first knew, everybody attacks you first and figures you out later. And the first time I was in the Washington Post, the article was so vicious it made me nauseous. I was so shocked that you could say that stuff about somebody you didn't even know based on assumptions and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They piece it all together and you don't get to say anything back. So I decided I don't want this. I was preaching for Pastor Bishop Donnie Mears, and nobody knew it because preachers can override their feelings and function. I preached, the place was on fire, but inside I want to quit. I told God, I'm through with this. I'm not going through this. I don't need this. I don't need that. I'm a guy who likes to go get his own chicken wings. I don't have to have all of that stuff to be happy. So I thought, I'm not doing this no more. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this because I don't need this and I didn't ask for this. I'm only doing this because of what happened in my life, of the circumstances that happened in my life. He put me on stage. I didn't ask for it. And when I saw how much it cost, I thought, you can have that right back here. You can have that right back up in here. I don't need it. So I was mad inside and I was hurt. And I stayed up in the fellowship with the pastors because I didn't want to go back to my room and sulk in my own sorrows. And they said, there's a lady downstairs waiting to see you. The service was over and the fellowship was over. The pastor was starting to leave. I was trying to outwait her. I thought she'd give up and leave. And when I finally came down the steps, she was there. And she was just a willowy bit of a woman. And she said, Bishop Jakes, she said, I've been in the hospital. She said, I was pregnant in my fallopian tubes, and the baby died in my tubes, and I was carrying around a dead baby, and the toxicity from the baby almost killed me. And she said, the only thing that kept me alive was hearing you preach. She said, if you hadn't been preaching to me every day, I swear I would have died. And then she looked at me and she said, it's for us. It's not for them. It's for us. It hit me so hard. I didn't even get her name. I got in the car and cried all the way back to my room because she reminded me why I was there. Last week when I text you, I was up in Baltimore in D.C. and I was doing a book signing. And this woman came up to the table to buy a sword. She said, you don't remember me, do you? I said, no. She didn't even look like the same person. She's all dressed up and gained weight. She felt like she wanted to say, she said, I met you in the bottom of Donnie Mears Church years ago, and I burst into tears. I lost it. I stopped the signing, and I jumped up and hugged her. If it were not for that woman.
The word is gone forth. It is time to go forward. Double doors of opportunities will open as we advance to take new territories for the Lord. There will be a new passion for God and His dealings as we press deeper into Him. There will be productivity in every area of our lives, in businesses, in innovation, and in ministry. We will progress as we engage our communities and our world with the power and love of God. Families will not be left behind as we build legacies for the future. It is time to move. It is time for opportunities. It is time to do great things. 2020. Our time to advance.
Get ready for the Word of God as we welcome the Senior Pastor of Fruitful House, Reverend Albert Osai Acuna.
Good evening and welcome back to such a wonderful time. We've been dealing with family life too. Started drug addiction. Last week, if you joined us, we had all these pharmacists come to speak to us about the pharmacology, the drug aspect of the addiction. Today is going to be a continuation of where we left off. What we said last week is that there is hope. If you are addicted, there is hope for you. God did not create us so that we become waste. And no matter where you are, there is still hope for you. Maybe you've hit the bottom because of drug abuse or the misuse of substances. There is still hope for you. And if you have not attempted it, please don't do it, because the pain is unimaginable. The effects and the consequences of taking these substances. We're going to explain it today so you will have an idea of what it does. But it's my joy and pleasure tonight because I have with me Megan Keepin. Megan is a registered psychotherapist in his qualifying stages. Megan has a master's degree in arts, in counseling psychology. In her undergraduate studies, she did justice studies. She has experience in working with individuals in areas such as anger management, stress management, depression, anxiety, trauma, and addictions. She focuses on individuality and achieving self-actualization with her clients through the collaborative, client-centered approach. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Megan Keepin. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Last week we dealt with the pharmacology of these medication, what they are, the over-the-counter medication prescription, and how people get addicted to it. It seems like when you are young, it's so easy to do things without thinking. And sometimes we don't know the consequences of these actions. That is why I'm so happy to have you here to help us put some meaning to some of these issues. Now, what is substance abuse? What is it?
So, I mean, addiction and substance use, the definitions vary. So, with addiction, how I personally define addiction is the compulsive need to take part in substance use despite the harmful consequences. So, there are harmful consequences that we are generally aware of, but the addictive component of it makes it very hard for us to pay attention to those consequences.
Wow. Wow. How long does it take for me or somebody to get addicted?
There is no time frame for that. You can be addicted as quickly as your first intake of your substance.
You mean first intake, you could be addicted?
Absolutely. There is no textbook timeline. It's different for everybody.
Wow.
My question is then, what do you describe on?
Okay. Okay, that's it.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
I
you're
think
good.
I'm good. Yes. So my question then is, what is addiction? Like when you say somebody can get addicted at the first use, what do we describe as addiction?
That compulsive need to engage in that substance. So the reason for that is because we have a reward pathway in our brain. So the reward pathway in our brain is called the mesolimbic dopamine system. So when we intake substance, that releases dopamine. So when dopamine is released, it makes you feel good. So when those substances are ingested into our body, however we consume them, then that dopamine is released. So then it's very hard to not want that feeling, that excessive great feeling over and over again. And because of that, that leads to the addiction because of that reward system that you get with that.
Wow. That's very, very interesting. Now, if somebody gets addicted, do they know they are addicted or somebody has to tell them?
So there are actually stages. There's a model called the trans-theoretical model, also known as the stages of change model. So anybody who's addicted to substances can be on any variation of this model, and it tends to go in this following order. So initially, you have the pre-contemplation stage. So in this stage, you're not really thinking it's an addiction. So, I mean, you might have other people telling you, I think that you're addicted. You might need to seek some resources, might need to seek some help. But in that stage, that individual may not be ready to take that part in their journey. So then that brings us to the contemplation stage. So in this stage, the individual is willing to consider the possibility of changes. So as I'm sure you guys have heard of before, the pros and the cons list, right? This is when the pros and the cons list comes into play. So then you start looking at, okay, how can this affect me? What is the instant gratification? And kind of debating, is this something that I need to pursue the help to get away from this addiction? And then from this stage, we have the preparation stage. So in the preparation stage, here we're starting to decide to stop drinking. So what is our plan of action? Because when we're preparing to do anything, we need a plan of action. After the preparation stage, we go into the action stage. So what are we doing? How are we carrying out that plan that we're making to get away from the addiction that we're experiencing? So it's putting your plan into action, whatever your plan is. Typically, those action plans involve individual therapy, maybe entering a detox treatment center. Maybe it's attending group therapy sessions such as Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, things of that nature to help you along with your journey. And then finally, we get into the maintenance stage. So now in the maintenance stage, we want to ensure that we are continuing our sobriety. So sobriety is the end goal achievement that we want to try to attain. However, one really important message is that there is room for relapse. So relapse is going back to that drug of choice despite your sobriety. When relapse happens, it's important that as therapists such as myself and different inpatient detox treatment centers, that we prepare our clients and give them the tools to deal with those relapses. Once they have those tools, then we can work right back into the sobriety and attaining that sobriety and getting back into that maintenance phase.
Wow. Which of the stages is most difficult?
I would say that depends on the individual. However, personally, from what I have seen in my experience working with individuals, it would be the pre-contemplation stage. The hardest part is admitting and accepting, because that means that we have a fault.
Now, if somebody's refusing to admit, how do we help the person?
So that's when we draw on the family supports. So as practitioners or as family members, we try to come together as a collective team and try to work with one another to try to work through this. So, for example, as a practitioner, I will call on family supports to come in and help with this.
Right.
When we are talking about family support.
Mhm.
When we're talking family support, what can family members do?
Yeah. So I
What
think
are the steps for family members to be able to help somebody who is addicted?
right. So I think the biggest thing that we need to focus on is listening to the individual. What is it? What is their factor for engaging in the substance use? How can we support them? That's what's very important. A lot of times there's misconceptions of how we should support somebody.
Okay.
But if we're approaching every individual based on their individual needs, it's important that we ask them and pay attention to what it is that they require. Do they feel neglected? Do they need that extra support? Do they need to pull on resources? Do we need help as the family in understanding what the addiction is? Because if we need to support them, we need to be in understandings of what it is that they're going through.
Wow.
That's true.
Now,
Go ahead.
sorry, go on.
I was just going to follow on
Yeah.
on that. So, if I want to support a family member who is addicted, either the person is not recognizing that they are addicted, or they do, but they feel helpless or unwilling, am I allowed to force that person into therapy? Is there room for forceful therapy, or it always has to be voluntary?
So that's a very good question. If we look at the success rates for inpatient detox treatment centers and people who are trying to deviate away from their addiction, it shows that if you are not being the person to enter that program or trying to eliminate your addiction, the chances of relapse are significantly higher, and the chances of attaining sobriety or even reaching the sobriety is significantly lower. It needs to come from within.
All right. So if a family member told me that they think they are getting addicted to a substance, but I shouldn't tell anybody, and I see that they keep doing it, what should I do?
I think education is the best thing that you can do for them. So educating them on it. How does substances affect us? How easy is it to get addicted? What are the consequences going to be of trying that substance? How can it impact somebody physically, mentally? What are those lasting consequences that can be detrimental? Also, talking to them how it can affect their relationship with others, how it affects family units, how it affects relationships, all of these areas that sometimes get lost, financial strain. There's all of these factors that come into consideration that's hard for an addicted individual to pay attention to and to recognize.
You mentioned a great word, education. Most of us don't know how to educate somebody who is in this substance abuse situation. Can you give us some level of education so that if there's somebody, and especially the audience as well, somebody in the family is going through that, what are the risk factors? How can we explain to them that this is dangerous?
So there are multiple risk factors that we can take into consideration. So when it comes to an individual, some predisposing factors that can kind of help us determine their level of addiction and helping them get through it. So what is the family dynamic? So with a lot of my clients, I look into what was the environmental exposure? Was there addiction in the household? Was there abuse? Was there neglect? Was there trauma that was being experienced? Then the peer group, peer pressure. We always hear that word, right? Peer pressure.
Yeah.
And it's huge. It's a major contributing factor because that's the environment that we grow up in, right? And we want to belong. We want that sense of belongingness. We all have attachments that we want to utilize. We want to be there in it with people. We want to experience life with people. So sometimes that leads down the road of addiction if that's the group that you're experiencing that environmental exposures with. And then we can also come to different things such as mental illness. Sometimes self-medicating is what people tend to lean towards. If you're feeling that anxiety, that depression, those unwanted feelings, sometimes that substance use can feel like such an amazing release to take it away without recognizing the consequences.
There are consequences. What are some of the consequences?
Yeah. So there are so many consequences that can happen. Some consequences range from drug-induced psychosis. So what that is if you engage in substance use, sometimes that can actually induce psychosis, which can be auditory hallucinations. So hearing things, hearing people speak to you, hearing people say negative comments to you when nobody's there. Then there can be visual hallucinations. There can be different other types of psychosis that you're experiencing, like delusions, things of that nature. So that can happen because of drugs, and that can actually stay after the drugs, after the detox is done. It can have lasting effects.
Oh, after detox, this can still happen.
It can, yes. There's a lot of elements to take into consideration. What is the mental health of the individual? A lot of the time, substance use and mental health go hand in hand, right? So what is the mental health of this individual? What are they experiencing? How is this drug going to affect their mental health? If there is a chemical imbalance, how is the drug going to affect that already chemical imbalance that's prevalent within that individual?
Wow. Now, wow. I want us to get to that place again. If this hallucinations can happen, there's a possibility it continues even after therapy. That means possibly something is definitely gone wrong in the person's brain.
Yeah. Yes.
Could it be a permanent damage?
Yeah, there absolutely can be lasting damage. Yes. And it all depends on the chemical property of the individual and how the substance manifests within them.
You keep mentioning depending on the individual. That means I cannot compare myself with anybody.
Nope. Every single individual will experience a different type of reaction or lasting effects or consequences than anybody else. Not everybody has the exact same consequences. Some of these drug-induced psychosis just last during the detoxing when the drugs is still in the individual's system. Sometimes it's lasting afterwards. Sometimes it goes away before the detox. Some people don't have that psychosis.
Wow.
So it really depends on the individual. And unfortunately, for the most part, if you don't know, the only way you'll find out is the hard way. And that's through engaging in those substance uses.
Wow.
So, if you can suffer these consequences and it can even continue after you are off the drug, the consequences can continue. What are some of the consequences? And I'm going into the case of where somebody is, say, pregnant and abusing substance, and some of the consequences will be affecting the fetus. Recently, I was reading from somebody who was going through something after the person is grown, and it is still, the person just got to know the person was adopted, and then once the person found the birth parent, realized that, oh, what I'm going through is due to that my birth parent was using drugs. And so now it revealed some of the problems that the person is going through. So what would you say into such a circumstance where somebody is abusing drugs and one of the consequences that is affecting some other person's health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, doing any substances when you are pregnant and carrying is very detrimental to the baby, can be very, very negative and have negative consequences. So there's fetal alcohol syndrome, for example. Mothers that drink when they are pregnant with their child, that leads to complications, right? There's also babies that are born based on the substance that their mother was consuming, so they're addicted right from birth. So those withdrawal symptoms are pretty prevalent. And I actually have a friend who is a nurse in the NICU. and has witnessed those babies, the withdrawal symptoms that they experience, the shaking, the tremors, the seizures. These are things that can happen when you are carrying a child and you consume substances. It can absolutely pass down to the child. There have been instances, there's all types of scholarly articles out there. There have been instances where it doesn't happen, but do you want to take that chance?
You can't take the chance.
This is, well, the more I'm hearing the risk, the more it's saying, don't go near this. You've mentioned psychosis, you've mentioned the effect it could have on children. Could you tell us more?
About the consequences that it can
Yes.
have? Yeah, absolutely. It also has consequences for financial strain. So if we look at some external, because we've been talking a lot about internal factors, right? So let's look at external.
Yes.
So there's financial strain, vulnerability of becoming involved in the criminal justice system, especially with the illegal substances, using illegal substances. That can increase your chances of getting into contact with the criminal justice system. It also affects your relationships with families, with peers, right? It also affects your ability to have a job, to have an education. How is that focus going to be intact? How are you going to be able to attend to your needs, even just your basic living needs,
Yep.
right? Sometimes, a lot of the time, actually, our health becomes compromised. Not just our mental health, but our self-care. Are we attending to our self-care? Are we being hygienic, right? Other risks, for example, if we're using intravenous, so if we're using needles to inject the substance that we're using, that can lead to different complications such as HIV exposure, hepatitis exposure. So there are a lot, both internal and external factors that are at risk in engaging in substance use.
And even accidents and
Accidents, yes.
causing the life of other people apart from yourself.
Exactly. And that's what I mean with the consequences. It's very important to look at all factors.
So we are not talking about just you anymore. So sometimes the encouragement or the, what's the word I'm using for your reason for even trying to help yourself should be more than you yourself, should be greater than even you yourself, knowing that it can affect other people around you. If you don't have enough reason to help yourself, personal reason, you should also factor in other people around you that your addiction is affecting.
Now, thinking about this, I'm going back to the individual person and the effect it has on you, because you said it's a person-to-person case.
Right.
Your chemical disposition, your DNA, your makeup, and the rest. That means if my friend is doing it, it doesn't necessarily mean that I may escape as the friend has escaped.
No. You can have a completely different reaction. There can be somebody doing the exact same substance that doesn't feel anywhere near to what you're feeling. And that's because of your chemical makeup, right? Who you are as an individual, your DNA, your biology, everything is so different from person to person. So one person who, may try something like marijuana and not experience hallucinations, it might just calm them down or make them relaxed. Someone else can experience hallucinations and paranoia. So it can have completely different side effects depending on the individual.
Wow.
And I was going to also ask, how about second-hand impact? Because we spoke about environment. And so if I'm in an environment where smoking is going on or other practices are going on there, how does it affect me even if I'm not engaging directly myself in the act?
Well, first of all, if you're not directly engaged, it doesn't mean that you can't become predisposed to being engaged. Because when you're surrounded by something like that for so long and you want that inclusive feeling, us as humans, we long for that belongingness, right? We want to belong. look at the church, right? We want that belongingness.
We want to belong.
That's us as humans. So if we're disposed to a different type of environment, why would we not go for something that'll help us belong? Why would we not enter that? And even if it's not us that's engaging in it right there and then, what example are we setting for other people around us? What are we bringing our children up in? What are our family members being exposed to? Right? So it's not just how do we perceive it, how are we dealing with it, but as a community, how can we fix this? How can we ensure that nobody gets sucked into addictions and loses their control and inability to control, you know, their addiction?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then, coming back to like smoke, in Canada, for instance, we know that there is a law against smoking indoors because other people are inhaling what you are pouring out. So I can be in an environment, although I'm not engaging in it, that what somebody else is doing is actually affecting my health as well. Can somebody get all these reactions we are talking about, consequences that we are talking about from secondhand inhaling of what is going on around you?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you actually bring up smoking, like even cigarettes. That is still an addiction. That is a drug, right? So being around somebody who is smoking cigarettes, we know that secondhand smoke is something that can affect us, something that can affect our physical health, right? And being around all these other types of substance use can also impact us. I remember, and I'll never forget, hearing a story about a needle being left on the ground, for example, and a kid running and stepping on that needle, and the kid contracted HIV.
Wow.
So it can impact, whether it's directly or accidental, whatever the situation is, there is a way of impacting. And that story really stuck with me. I was very disheartened to hear that in a community where we're supposed to protect each other and love each other and provide support and nourishment to one another, that something like that could happen to a vulnerable child.
Wow.
So accidental, what proportion of the addictions and consequences can be apportioned to accidental or second-hand impact?
Yeah, so for example, drinking and driving. Consuming any substance and driving, for that matter. It doesn't just have to be drinking alcohol, right? But drinking alcohol is widely known that that's not something that we should be doing when we're driving, right? But there's other all substances shouldn't be used when you're driving. So that's a prime example of an accidental injury just waiting to happen and can lead to fatalities, and often does lead to fatalities. A common misconception too, I've heard a lot in my time working with youth, especially when it comes to addiction, is marijuana. It's not impairing me the way that alcohol does, so I can drive. I can see directly in front of me. However, your peripheral vision is gone.
Wow.
If a child runs into the road or if an animal runs into the road, it's not going to be a good consequence.
Yeah.
You mentioned marijuana, and it's one of the things that bothers me, like cigarettes. The government labels cigarettes that it can cause cancer, but he still allows us to sell it. And now in Canada, they legalize marijuana. Why?
I couldn't tell you. From my personal experience in talking with people, a very common answer that seems to come up in discussion is it's the government's way of ensuring that there's no added substances that are harmful into marijuana if it was from off the street, such as fentanyl, which fentanyl has been known to be inputted in all types of substances, which is leading to a lot of fatalities. And also other chemicals that don't have to be illegal substances. It can be cleaning products that are being introduced. So that's a primary discussion that I've been hearing. Other than that, I would really like to see how it's going to be regulated.
Because as a therapist, if you were given the chance to advise the government, would you say they should go ahead?
I think in this situation, I would need to know what their stance was on it.
If it's economical, what would you say?
If it's, sorry?
Just economical, because they want money, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say let's pay attention to the people at hand and what's going to happen with these individuals if we start legalizing all of these substances. Again, I would need to know their primary reason for going in that direction. This is speculation, what I've discussed with others, but I would need to know the direction, what the reason is, and what's going to be following through to ensure safety of the community.
Because definitely, you mentioned the economic benefits of allowing legalizing marijuana, and I've officially read government reports that they are saying, it's better we have the money in our pockets than in the hands of the drug pushers. And I was shocked that we are here discussing about marijuana and its impact on society, on our families, on our fathers and mothers and children and all that, and putting money into therapy and all that to rehabilitate people. And the very people that should be looking out for us to minimize or eliminate are legalizing the very substance that is affecting the society. And the explanation is that it's better the money is in our pockets than in the pockets of the drug pushers, which means our government become drug pushers. How do you fight such a battle? How do you win when those who are supposed to help reduce this substance circulation and everything else that goes with it are now making it available? How be they feel maybe in a controlled manner. But substance is substance. So if you don't have an answer to it, that's fine.
Well, what I would say is, again, education. Educate yourself. Just because you're told that this is legal, this is allowed, doesn't mean that you should take that at face value to make your educated decision. Education is everything. Look into it. Speak to people. Speak to practitioners. Speak to people that are educated in the field. Consult with people. See if this is something that you think would be beneficial to you. Look at the consequences of the action.
Make
that personal decision. But I think education is definitely the motivating factor that everybody should take their own accountability for.
Wow. This has been an amazing time. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back. We're going to talk about the therapy components because there is still hope if you are addicted.
There is always hope.
Yes.
Always.
And, we're going to stick with you. We're going to direct you to the proper places to get help. We'll pray with you. We will stand with you. You are not alone. Here in Fruitful House, we believe strongly that we stick with people. We build people. We don't break down people. If you're already down, we want to hold your hand and lift you up. Yes. We're not here to push you down.
And to lift the shame out of, helping people.
So stay tuned. We'll be back soon. And don't go away. Invite a friend. We are so glad to have you back. Megan has been really telling us a lot of things and explaining how these things work. Now, in this session, I want us to delve into therapy components, how these things are treated. Megan, how do we deal with these addictions?
So addiction is one of those things that we definitely need to draw on support. It's very, very hard to do it alone. So my biggest suggestion would be consult people that can help you through it. So there's individual therapy. I'll go through the different types of therapy and different ways of reaching out. So individual therapy, for example, there's a lot of therapeutic modalities that can help with addiction. Me personally, I tend to go towards cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy, also known as DBT. So with cognitive behavioral therapy, it looks at your emotions, how you're processing your emotions, the thoughts associated, the automatic maladaptive negative thoughts, and then helping to aid in those to change your cognition for better anticipated behaviors. So I like to really look at the why. Why is it that we're experiencing this? What is it that you're going through that you turn to addictions? What is the underlying reason for this? Let's process it. Let's process it instead of avoiding. Substance use is an avoidant strategy. So when cognitive behavioral therapy comes into play, we can look at coping skills. What can we use? What can we delve into? So we look at defense mechanisms, right? So deflecting, denial, avoidant behaviors, all of these fall into the category with substance use. So we want to look at, okay, how do we process our emotions and deal with the issues at hand? Because if we don't accept what we're feeling, we're always going to resort to a means of escape. And that's where that substances come in. Also, when we look into dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, we look at emotion regulation. How do we regulate our emotions? The importance of being mindful, being present. When you're mindful and you're present, it's a lot easier to deal with the issues at hand and to get the proper support and techniques and stabilizing that you require. So then you can incorporate grounding techniques, stabilizing techniques. And then also we look at distress tolerance. So what is going on? What is the distress that you're experiencing? And how can we tolerate it? How can we make it so that we can deal with it in an effective manner? So it's looking at all of these areas, pulling on all of these techniques and interventions, and working with each individual person. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter if two clients have the exact same drug of choice, their treatment plan is going to be
Totally different.
Wow.
very individualistic. And I think that that's the best approach to use.
I think so
is
too.
to be individualistic, because every person is different. What is trauma to you might not be trauma to another person. So it's important to let the individual tell you what their experiences mean to them, how it affects them, and how can we work through it to get to a better place.
I want you to tell us something about being in a place where you are receiving therapy. How does it look like?
Sorry, when you're
Like you've started therapy. How does it look like? The whole experience.
So, I mean, the first session is really just getting to know each other. So, I mean, within the first session, there's also confidentiality and consent that needs to be discussed to ensure that everybody is safe and everybody knows the course and the routine and what's going to happen with the treatment plan. And then it's getting to know one another, allowing that person, giving that person a safe space to talk. Sometimes, and a lot of times, people don't have that opportunity to talk to somebody who is not going to be judgmental, to somebody that understands that sometimes we make decisions that aren't the best, but it's coming from places of hurt. Recognizing what's underlying in those feelings, because anger is a go-to emotion. And when I see anger in my clients, I always encourage them, dig deeper. There's other emotions. And we see that anger is a secondary emotion. So it's just being personable with your client, understanding how they are impacted. What is it that they went through? And then what works with them? I might introduce a grounding technique, ask them to try it, and they say it doesn't work. And that's okay, because one thing that works for one person is not going to work for another. So then we just hit the book again and we look at another grounding technique. So how I like to do it is I like to give my clients the freedom to make it a collaborative experience. It's very client-centered and collaborative. They are the agent of their change. And it's important that they get that freedom to make that decision and those changes. I will guide them on the way, I will support, and I will provide those tools and interventions. And at the end of the day, they have to come up with their accountability, their assertiveness, their boundaries. What is it that they want to seek? And let's reach a goal and let's attain it together.
Is there an average time for therapy that somebody, on the average, that somebody is able to turn things around? Or it just varies?
Completely varies. I wish I could give you an average, but I don't even have an average. In my work alone, if I were to look at my clients, there is no average. I've had clients that I've had for numbers and numbers of sessions, and clients that I've had for a minimal number of sessions. Clients that I see on a weekly basis, clients that I might see on a bi-weekly basis, a monthly basis, right? And I think it also depends on the multidisciplinary team. Who else is involved in this, right? Who's involved in the process? Is the individual also attending group counseling?
Right.
Are they attending family therapy sessions as well?
Right.
Which are the other 2 therapy sessions that I'll go into. So with the group sessions, when it comes to addiction specifically, there are different types of groups that help support in addictions. So there's AA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. There they go through a 12 steps. In the 12 steps, it's very spiritual in nature. So for some individuals that aren't spiritual, there is an alternative, which is the SMART recovery. The SMART recovery also helps. It's a unity base. Everybody in there is also experiencing addiction, but there's no spiritual component. So it allows for that same sort of concept, but not forcing spirituality on that individual. Then there's also Narcotics Anonymous, because Narcotics Anonymous allows for other types of substances too. So there's these different groups that you can pull on, and then you talk amongst your peers. Sometimes the greatest support is talking amongst those who understand.
True.
When I'm working with clients and I have group therapy sessions, that's where some of the real rich nutrients comes from in conversation. Is that relatability, that understanding, that unity, that empathy, that belongingness. That belongingness that drove the addiction can sometimes be that belongingness that gets them out, depending on what their environmental exposure becomes. And I've seen some great work done in inpatient detox treatment centers. Some phenomenal collaboration with practitioners and clients, with the peers and the clients themselves, with the multidisciplinary team, whether that's nurses coming in, doctors coming in, right? So the more support that we have to draw on, the more collective we can deal with the issue at hand. And then we also have families therapy. So family therapy sessions are important too. Like what I was saying earlier, family needs to understand what addiction is. What is it that their child, their brother, their uncle, their daughter, what is it that that individual is experiencing? And how can you support them? Learn the techniques with them, right? Go into those sessions with your therapist. Learn what it takes to become an aiding person in their recovery journey.
Wow.
And so, would you say it is advisable? You spoke about group sessions where other people who have experienced the addiction are present, and they are also sharing their experiences and all that. Would you advise somebody who is going through a recovery to befriend or team up with another person going through recovery? Is it advisable, or it can backfire?
So, I mean, it's very dependent on the relationship. And in counseling, that's where you learn what is healthy, what is unhealthy in terms of relationships, right? So if both of you have the same goal in mind, and if you're a good support system on one another, and the relationship is a healthy relationship to aid in your recovery, I would say make that connection. Absolutely. But once that becomes an unhealthy relationship and boundaries are crossed on your part, then I would say reevaluate the situation.
Now, we've been speaking about some of these substances without mentioning them. What are some of these dangerous substances that we must avoid at all costs?
So, I mean, there's different types of substances. So there's different categories of substances as well.
Okay.
So there's three specific categories. And I mean, if you look at research, there's a bunch of different categories, a bunch of different things. But for the purpose of simplicity, we're going to go off of this.
Okay.
So the first one is stimulants. So stimulants are specific drugs that speed up the individual's central nervous system and their brain. So drugs of this nature can be amphetamines. So Adderall, Ritalin, these are prescription drugs used to treat ADHD.
Okay.
Then there's also methamphetamines and crystal meth, also known as crystal meth, cocaine. Then we have nicotine in cigarettes and caffeine. So it ranges from very like street drugs to legal substances that can become illegal when not used properly. If a prescription is not prescribed to you, you are not using that prescription properly.
Before you get to your third category, you mentioned caffeine.
That's as my mind went to that.
Yeah.
This is very serious. Caffeine. So I can easily get addicted to caffeine.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we are talking about the regular caffeine in like our beverages.
Yeah, absolutely. So some people actually experience withdrawal symptoms from lack of caffeine.
Wow.
So that can lead to headaches, dizziness, nausea,
Shaking.
shaking.
Because I remember I loved coffee. I really, just the aroma, not taking the coffee, but I love the aroma of coffee. But I realized that when I take coffee, I shake.
Yeah.
So that is a reaction.
Yeah.
And so I stopped taking coffee.
Yes, and it can also affect your mood, irritability,
Wow.
anger, aggression, agitation.
There's one question from your audience that I want to pick up and ask you, Megan. Megan, they say, can anger be considered an addiction? How do you know that someone's anger has become an addiction and need to seek help?
So I would say anger, how I view anger and how I explain it to my clients is that it's usually the secondary emotion, but used as a primary emotion. So people tend to use it often when they want to explain their emotions.
Okay.
So they tend to go to, I'm angry, if they're feeling guilt, if they're feeling shame. It's a lot easier to say, you upset me, you are the reason I'm feeling this way, than to say, I am experiencing guilt.
Wow.
I am experiencing embarrassment. So it's an easy deflective mechanism that can be used.
So that if I start being angry on you, I hope when we get home and I get angry.
It's education. I'm getting to it.
So it is a secondary emotion.
Yes, I mean, it can be a primary emotion, but typically, through my experience in working with clients, it tends to be a secondary emotion. Don't get me wrong, it can be a primary emotion, but that's a very common mistake that people tend to default to that being a primary emotion all the time.
All the time.
Wow. This is amazing. All right. So now I'll let you go your third category of them.
Sure. So we actually didn't even go to the second. So let's do the second.
Second, okay.
The second is depressants. So these slow down the activity in the central nervous system. So with this, it makes an individual feel tired, sleepy, less pain. So some examples of depressants would be alcohol is a depressant. Major tranquilizers are also depressants. Benzodiazepines, so Valium, for example, or opioids, so heroin or morphine. And some other substances can also be considered depressants, such as glue, paint, things of that nature.
Right.
And then we have our third category, which is hallucinogens. So that alters sensory perceptions and distorts images.
Whoa.
Yes. So that can also distort perceptions and states of consciousness. So with that comes with different types of drugs as well. So there is psilocybin, which is known as magical mushrooms.
Right.
And then also with that is LSD. which is a specific type of acid that is also used and has that effect as well. And then there are other types of drugs that don't necessarily just fit in one of those categories. It tends to all of those categories. So a couple examples of that is MDMA or ecstasy, cannabis, and also the substances such as blue and paint that I discussed. So ecstasy and cannabis can produce hallucinations. And it can also be a stimulant, a depressant as well. So it can apply to any one of those categories.
How widespread is substance abuse?
How do you explain it?
How widespread? How big a problem is that?
I would say very widespread. I would say it's definitely international. Every country experiences substance use and addictions. And it's very common. And a lot of the time, a question I'll get is, how can I tell if somebody is abusing substances? What do I look for? What do they look like? And the answer is humans. We can't tell who it is that's engaging in substances. Because on one side, people tend to think it's a homeless population solely. However, there are wealthy people that also experience addiction. Right? So it's breaking that stigma and understanding that any one of us can be susceptible to addiction, regardless if there's trauma or if it's idle time and boredom. Addiction can come in all capacities. So it's important to pay attention and get educated on it. Remove that stigma, right? There's a lot of shame and embarrassment that goes into it.
Exactly.
Right? But if we look at this as a mental illness, then let's empathize with that. Let's provide the support. Taking away that support and not having that, empathetic nature to you and drawing conclusions, being judgmental, being narrow-minded about it, blaming is not going to help with getting to sobriety. And that's why support is so important. It's important who we have around us, right? It's important to recognize those healthy relationships and pull on them, and then recognize the destructive ones.
In general, how early do people get addicted?
It can happen at any time. Anytime.
That's scary. Anytime as early as?
Your first encounter with that substance.
And what are the age groups where they normally start these addictions? Apart from those that has been transferred by maybe when the fetus, in the normal sense of it, what age will be the age that takes this addiction?
I don't have a particular age, but we look at vulnerable populations.
Right.
So adolescents will be considered a vulnerable population. And the reason for that too is as adolescents, so you have your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is responsible for memory retention, making rational decisions, making good judgment calls. So that part of the brain is not fully developed until the age of 25.
Until what age?
25.
I read that.
So without having that prefrontal cortex developed, you're not at your full capability of making those informed decisions.
Right. You're giving me a tool. I'm going home to deal with my my so-called adult population in my house who are not 25 years. The prefrontal lobe is not developed yet fully. So their cognition is limited.
Yeah. So, I mean, they still have the capability of making those informed decisions, don't get me wrong, but it's not fully developed. So introducing a foreign substance can definitely have negative consequences, especially because that's a vulnerable population. Just looking at it from neurological development approach, right?
But that could slow down their development then. The substance abuse could slow down their development.
It can definitely lead to impairments in the development.
So then why don't they, I believe every human being has their own physical development and mental development, although we have like 25 to it. But since we know this as a general understanding, Why don't they raise things like being able to purchase alcohol and all these things to like 25 or 26 for that matter? Why do they lower it to 21? Then
I think we have to get some of these MPs here and ask them those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to bring in
exactly, because if this is
Scientifically proven.
scientific, this is scientific. So what I wonder what they are sometimes I lose the words I want to use.
Yeah.
But what is causing them to make such a decision for a population that is looking up to them to make laws and regulations to protect the vulnerable? You know, so if we know that, why don't we make it a law that you cannot purchase alcohol if you are not 26 years? Because we're giving you up to 25, and ensure that at 25 you are fully developed, you know, so that we cannot have some of the arguments. You know, I have the legal right.
Yeah,
having the legal right, the paper, doesn't mean it is good for you. Doesn't mean it will work well for you. So those parameters are there. But it looks like when something is legal, all caution is thrown out of the window. You know, and that is my challenge with this kind of law. Go ahead, Pastor.
What I'm thinking now is the permanent scar that somebody can have. Like, my judgment is not fully developed at the age of 14. And so if I'm introduced to a substance that permanently destroys something, I lose it for the rest of my life. What advice will you give to such a vulnerable community that's those in adolescence or the youth? What advice will you give them?
I would say again, pay attention to the education. I think that there needs to be more implementation of this education, and substance needs to be more widely discussed. I think the stigma that's attached to it inhibits a lot of people from understanding the consequences. So platforms such as this that give the opportunity to individuals such as myself or other practitioners that can go and educate everybody on the harms that go hand in hand with this. I think it's very important for these young people to know what it is that they're getting involved with, know the severity of it, know what consequences can come from it. It's not in my place to tell these individuals what to do. However, I will definitely be an advocate for providing this education to help ensure that people are making those informed decisions.
Yeah,
because it's important to know how it's going to impact you.
Yeah.
And as a community, we need to build each other up. We need to be there for each other, despite our differences, despite, you know, any shame or guilt we might attach to things. We need to become more understanding, less judgmental, and have more area for these conversations to take place.
When somebody is addicted to a substance, what are some of the physical traits, things you see physically with the person? What are some of the physical things you see when they are addicted?
So it definitely varies depending on the substance that they're addicted to. Sometimes it can be, for example, we can look at alcohol. When we see alcohol, we see people's slurred speech, right? Their ability to communicate things is impaired. And that's because of the depressant, the slowing down of that central nervous system. And then also we can see the lapse in judgment and even their physical mobility, right? Gets impaired. You'll see sometimes people hanging off walls trying to walk because their perception and lapse of space and judgment is completely skewed because of the influence of the substance, right? Also incoherent thoughts, right? Inability to express one's emotions constructively. So maybe getting into a violent encounter, or maybe it's crying, right? We see these movies, and a lot of the time we'll see somebody gets intoxicated in the films and has a certain reaction to it. And we laugh and it's funny, but it's not funny.
It's not funny.
It's not funny, especially when it can so deeply impact somebody.
Yeah.
So it's important that we understand that, yes, sometimes this is known as a comedic relief or recreational use, or I'm just going to do it this one time. But be careful. Be very careful because it's different for everybody.
I want to ask, maybe it's a little digressing from the therapy topic that we are having, but my question is, somebody may take, let's say marijuana. Okay, so two of us, and I take a little quantity, and the impact is immediate, it's huge on me. And somebody will take a whole lot, and we don't see the impact that is having on you, on me. Does it mean that it is more dangerous to you who see immediate impact compared to me who doesn't see immediate impact, although I've consumed more than you have consumed?
So the issue with that is we can't see what's internally happening. We can't see how it's affecting our system. So we can't say that just because I'm not reacting in the same capacity that you are, that it's not as equally harmful. So, I mean, I don't have a straight answer for that because that would be something that would have to be examined from an internal standpoint, right? Understanding how it is distributing in your body, the breakdown of it, how it's affecting that chemical makeup.
So it's like saying maybe I took a level of alcohol, I didn't get drunk, but maybe it's affecting my kidneys. And my kidney is shutting down and I don't know. But I think the one who took maybe just a sip and fell down is being impacted. So we will not know until we really examine.
Because some of the impact can be immediate and some can be long term.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes it dangerous. Then we'll come to your second question. So what explains why people going through therapy or have successfully completed therapy fall back into substance addiction?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, there's a number of factors. So, are you putting the strategies that you've learned in therapy into place? Because when you're in therapy and you're doing all the work, it's easy to be motivated. However, are you putting yourself back into those certain environments around those certain individuals that can ignite the relapse to happen, right? Another part to it can also be just the immediate gratification, that want and that need for that immediate gratification, right? It's still a process. You have to rewire your cognition because now your body's used to, okay, I'm stressed out or I'm feeling this type of emotion. Let's use my avoidant behavior so that I don't have to attend to that unwanted emotion. And let's go for the substance use. And now you have to relearn how to now go for something positive. So it's a process. How I like to look at it is when you're a child and you're learning to walk, you get up once and walk. It's you learn. It's a learning process.
Yeah.
Anything that is different from what you've been exposed to and what you've been doing is going to be a learning process. So that's why in treatment, we also talk about relapse prevention. We talk about what tools can you use if relapse occurs so that we can get back into the maintenance phase of the sobriety.
Wow.
So if somebody's addiction came about because of environment, in the beginning you spoke about environment. If it came about because of the environment, the person goes through therapy, but hasn't got a choice than to go back to the same environment. How does that person totally overcome the addiction?
Yep. So that's when those supports would come into place. Drawing on that support, drawing on the therapist, drawing on maybe attending those group therapy sessions, that family therapy sessions. Maybe there can be some adjustments made within the family home. It doesn't have to necessarily be the external environment, right? So trying to make those adjustments and learning, allowing yourself to take part in the tools and the interventions that are put into place, right? And the biggest thing I would say is pulling on that support system and asserting yourself, using your boundaries, right? Clarifying your boundaries to people. whether that is going to a wedding, for example, where you know maybe alcohol might be for somebody who's experiencing addiction to alcohol. Have an exit plan. What is the strategy if you're experiencing that urge and that impulsivity to have that drink? What can you do? Can you call a friend and leave with a friend? Right? Is there a way to exit the situation if need be?
I know some people where, let's say you are having a party, you call for a party. Let me give an example of church. In our church, we don't allow alcohol consumption in any of our gatherings. And so you invite somebody who consumes alcohol to a party, and the person says, "Will there be alcohol?" You said, "Oh no, non-alcohol." And because the alcohol is not served, they don't even show up at all. They don't want to show up, and they won't show up. Or I see some people show up and they bring their own, they hide to drink just because they want that influence. Maybe if they don't have that, they cannot enjoy. They have to be under the influence to be able to let themselves go to enjoy the relationships around them. And so because of that is their determining factor to choose whether to be part of a celebration or not. What level of addiction is that? That if they don't have that, they are coming into amongst people and they cannot have access to what the substance that can bring their guards down to be able to enjoy what is going. What would you say to such a person? How far have they gone in the addiction that they cannot even enjoy gatherings without having that present in that gathering?
Right. So that's where I would definitely pull on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So when alcohol is needed like that, or whatever substance it is needed like that, sometimes it can be because they're trying to avoid emotions that they're experiencing because it's not being processed. So maybe it's having that conversation, digging into it. Why do you feel the need to have this substance? Because sometimes, and I see it with my own clients too, once we start getting to the root of the problem, they learn how to regulate their emotions. They learn how to deal with their distress in a productive and healthy manner. They're able to now be in those social settings and not need substance use in order to even function in social settings.
Exactly.
Because sometimes the addiction can lead to social isolation.
That's right.
And inability to become social in those settings.
That's right.
So I think that's where therapy really comes into play to help with it. The level of addiction, that can vary. That doesn't have to be necessarily, 20 years from now deep into addiction. It can be at any state of the game that can happen. And that's why it's so important to draw on the supports that are in place to help.
Amazing. I'll use this opportunity to take your third question. There are lots of natural herbal medicines. Can one be addicted to these through self-medication?
So natural herbal medicine. So there's no substances in these? Or?
Well, I think the question is, let's say there is a flower, which is said to be a herb. Could there be some substances in it that we don't know, like maybe caffeine or something like magic mushroom, for instance, has makes you hallucinate. Yes. So could there be something in these herbal medicines that could harm us as well?
A lot of them, I think they will say, there is no harm in it. Take as much as.
Right. It should say it on the package. So I definitely urge you to look at what the ingredients are that's being put into it. Because I know that, of course, like cannabis, for example, can be put into tea. So that's something that you might want to look into if you're not sure where it's coming from. So I mean, to answer that question, I would kind of need to know what exactly is in it. But I would advise, read the label, read what it is that you're going to be introducing to your system, right?
Yeah, Megan, I think this question is maybe my uncle going to the bush and taking some leaves and bringing them home. Like, it's not like processed or tested, but they've been drinking it for years, and they say, well, it makes you feel good. You can take it. And I think the question is saying, those ones, see, they put in inverted, natural.
Mhm.
So they are not sort of regulated or maybe tested. Can you be addicted to one of those two?
I mean, it's definitely possible. Yes. But it would depend what's in it. Without me knowing what it is, unfortunately, I can't really answer that. But I would definitely advise, if you don't know what it is that you're consuming,
Stay away from it.
maybe stay away from it or look into it. See what it is that you are consuming, because whatever you're putting in your body is going to have the potential to affect it, whether it's negative or positive. So I would definitely advise getting to know what it is that's being put in that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Okay, so now, how do we develop coping mechanisms when we are having these substance addictions?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing in order to cope with it is to be honest with yourself and with others.
Right.
So addressing the issue at hand, get out of that denial stage, recognize that, you might need some support in this, and that's okay, because we all need support from time to time. With addiction, a very common thing that happens is lying. Lying becomes very, very common. So to get out of that pattern, let's start being honest. I think that would be probably one of the first steps. Another thing is learning those relaxation techniques, because substance helps us when we're stressed out, right? If we're anxious about something, or if we're sad about something and we feel it. When we have anxiety also manifests in physiological ways. So we experience the heart palpitations. Maybe your hands start sweating. Maybe your chest feels like there's something on it weighing it down. So we have these physiological reactions that are not favorable. So we want to eliminate it. So self-medication with substance is an easy route to go. However, if we learn relaxation techniques, we can learn how to get ourselves grounded. So there's different types. There's progressive muscle relaxation, which urges you to focus on your breath, tense your muscles, and release. There's autogenic relaxation, which is like a guided meditation that focuses on your breath as well. There's certain types of breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, things like that you can pull onto. Sensory grounding techniques, such as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's a bunch of different types of techniques. I wish I had more time to go into all of them, but pulling on these techniques.
Well, it's so educative. I've never heard of those ones. I love hearing them. So you take a few minutes and explain that to us, because it's very, very educative.
Yeah. So grounding techniques are things that help us put ourselves in the present moment and pay attention to what it is that's happening to us, recognizing ourselves, our physical selves. What is it that's happening to us? So, for example, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we look at our 5 senses, right? So touch, smell, hear, taste, and see. So then you can arrange it in any order you want, and you can do, okay, let me look at 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. It brings you to that present moment. You're grounded, you're in tune with yourself. So it helps to eliminate those physiological reactions and reduce that anxiety.
So basically taking your attention off what you are feeling to other things in your around you.
Yes.
That you can take in.
And being in tune with yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Then there's other things like gratitude journaling, right? Recognizing the positives. A lot of the time, especially in cognitive behavioral therapy, we'll learn that automatically our mind tends to go to maladaptive negative thoughts.
Yeah.
So it's important to recognize the positives that's happening. Give yourself those successes, take those successes and those wins. Sometimes we minimize it, that, oh, you know what, that's a very minor thing that happened. Let's just brush it off. But how do we get to the big picture? The big picture is brought about from all these minor successes.
Wow.
So own those minor successes. Congratulate yourself. Take that opportunity to show yourself some self-compassion, right?
Wow.
Then also attending to our self-care. I think that's the biggest thing that as humans we don't do. Work becomes priority. Family becomes priority. Everybody becomes priority except for yourself. And that's when the risky consequences can come into play, because you get so overwhelmed. I need to attend to all these things with not enough time in the day. Well, you need to make that time in the day. You need to allow yourself that time for self-care. I give myself that time for self-care. I urge everybody to give themselves time for self-care. 'Cause
Right.
that's what's going to help you. And in turn, that's what's going to make you better in society for yourself and for others that you're
Correct.
experiencing your life with,
Yeah.
right? Other things that can work too is pulling on spiritual practices, getting back in touch with your spirituality. A lot of the time with individuals that I work with, they lose that disconnect with their spirituality. They belong to a church group and now they don't belong to that church group anymore. Well, that can really impact you because spirituality for some individuals can be very important. So it's important that you get back in tune with those things. How do you reintegrate back into that, right? What can you do to bring yourself back into that spiritual component so that you feel that belongingness with that group that you've experienced that belongingness with? Good social support. Then there's also avoiding risky situations. So don't put yourself in those situations where you might be tempted.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a party and you know that there's going to be a lot of substances available at hand, maybe don't go to that party, right? So recognizing what's beneficial for you and taking accountability for those actions too, right? And then also the tactics that you learn and the strategies that you learn in therapy as well. So recognizing my emotions are heightened right now, I need to get myself grounded and then attend to the issue at hand. Because when we operate based on our emotions, the result
some
is usually
mistakes.
never
Not very
a
good.
satisfactory result.
Not very good at all.
So those are just a few. There are so many that we can pull on. And that's why I really urge people to seek that support, seek those social supports in order to attend to those areas.
Where are some of the places that people can have access to some of the list of the things you've mentioned here?
Yeah, good question. So if you go online and look up, grounding techniques and relaxation methods, make sure it's coming from a reputable source.
Okay.
That's the number one thing that I caution. So you can look up scholarly, peer-reviewed articles and how different relaxation works for different types of mental ailments that you're experiencing, right? Because there are certain relaxation techniques that are beneficial for certain things. There's certain models and modalities to go to for certain mental illnesses. So you can get that information from those avenues. There's also self-help lines that you can call, right? Consultations that you can have with therapists. Maybe even reaching out to a teacher if you're a student in school, or reaching out to somebody who's had experience in therapy before. Drawing on as much support as you can, but also making sure that you're getting reliable information. You're not just going on internet arbitrarily. Wikipedia, you can
That's
edit
what-
stuff.
Yes.
So
That's
making
the
sure that you're
danger.
using reputable sources.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is one reputable source that you can recommend?
Google Scholar. If you go on Google Scholar.
Google Scholar.
Scholar. Okay.
Yes. So Google Scholar, there's an option to select scholarly peer-reviewed articles.
Okay.
You can go on there and select the scholarly peer-reviewed articles. That means that there has been, it has been scholarly reviewed. So this way we know that the information that we're obtaining is factual information.
Awesome. Right. I'll take your fourth question. It says, beyond emotional support, what other support can family members give?
And that's a fantastic question. So beyond the emotional support, also just engaging in activities with that individual. So if you know that that individual who is addicted to their substance use enjoys going on hikes, maybe allowing for time in your schedule and their schedule to go on hikes with them. Maybe it's going out somewhere with them that you know that they enjoy, like going to a beach and hanging out at a beach with them. Maybe it's helping them in getting into work, things like that. So, I mean, of course, emotionally, somebody would need your support, but it's also good to recognize when somebody doesn't want your emotional support and could just use a friend to entertain the activities that they enjoy doing.
Wow. Okay.
So there's a multitude of ways, and I would say just listen to what it is that individual requires and try to do it with them or help get them in that direction.
One question that has been on my mind: are there some addictions that lead to other addictions?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes, you can be addicted to one particular substance, and then another substance is introduced, and that gives you another type of high, right? So you might want to go on to that addiction now. Or it gives you a different type of high that now you're liking this type of high. So, I mean, the more willing you are to experience and dabble in different types of substances, the more at risk it puts you. So yeah, there is a high likelihood of that.
Sometimes people are looking for a high, maybe the same high, but is it possible that maybe they are using one substance and it's no more giving them that high?
Yeah.
So they go look for an alternative that will give them that high because that substance is not giving them what they want anymore. Is it possible that people can become numb to one substance, that they are not getting the feeling that they used to get from it, and therefore they look for alternative?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility that they might not experience the same euphoric feelings that they were experiencing. Sometimes even with substances, we can initially feel those euphoric feelings because of the dopamine that I was explaining earlier with the reward pathway. But also, there can be instances in which now it's not a rewarding feeling or a positive feeling, but now it's inducing paranoia. Now it's inducing anxiety. So it can actually have a different effect on you at some period within your substance use.
So it's not being enjoyed anymore.
Yes.
And when people are feeling those things, do they recognize that they are feeling those things?
Yeah, for some individuals, yes, it's very evident. In my experience working with my clients for the most part have been very aware in stating that I'm not even happy doing these substances, or I'm not happy engaging in this substance use, but it's just something I need, A, because emotionally I can't process what it is that I'm dealing with, or B, I don't want the withdrawals to come, the physical withdrawals. So to ensure that that doesn't happen, let's maintain the consumption or however it is that you're intaking the substance.
That brings me to a follow-on question. I know they have centers where they allow people to come and use drugs, official government centers where they allow to come in and safely use the drugs. Is it recommendable that you will let people come and actually use the drugs that you want to take away from them?
So I believe you're referring to injection sites, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the idea behind the injection sites is that it's trying to eliminate people from sharing needles, which can lead to potential HIV, hepatitis, blood disorders that can be passed along. So that's a harm reduction approach. So it's dependent on how you're going about therapy. So if you want complete abstinence, that might look different. However, if you're just trying to reduce the harm, which a lot of like nonprofit organizations, for example, will use harm reduction approaches. So even if the person doesn't want to abstain, it's at least creating an opportunity for them to not accidentally contract something in the process. So that's one reason to it that I am familiar with. I have worked at nonprofit organizations before and volunteered with nonprofit organizations, and that was the motto. That was the rationale behind it. So, I mean, if that's a way to keep you safe in some capacity, and you think that that's beneficial for you, that would be something that you have to decide for yourself.
So, is it a means to an end, or an end in itself, that they don't want them to contract other diseases, and so this is a safe way to continue with this particular one, keep doing it safely, or they are using that as a means to help them totally come out of the usage?
I believe the idea is to help them use safely. From my understanding, that is the idea. I don't really work for harm reduction or addiction sites, but that is my understanding.
So the goal is not to help them even get out of it completely, but just to safely use it.
Yeah, for the most part, it's for safe use. I mean, if there is an opportunity to help get them into sobriety, by all means, I'm sure the individuals there would definitely draw on resources and help them to the best of their ability. But the objective is to reduce the potential harm that can come from consuming these substances in a dangerous capacity.
Because it could be where those people have used it onto the point that their cognition is non-existent any longer. They cannot even help themselves any longer. So that could be maybe a safe avenue for them, because they will use it anyway if they cannot even address their self-consciousness is gone. So I see what you said. Now, one question I want to ask before we go is, what is this opioid epidemic that we hear?
Sorry, the what epidemic? Opioid epidemic. So opioids are very widely used. Very widely used.
Wow.
What are they?
Opioids can range from so many things. Like there's prescription medication. There's like a very big one right now, like fentanyl is very big in the pandemic that's going on with drug use, heroin, and then putting chemicals and substances, mixing it in these substances, which can lead to fatalities.
Wow.
Or too much of a substance being added. And that's the harm, especially with drugs, getting them off the street. We don't know exactly what's being put into these substances. So the pandemic of the fatalities is due to the unknown of what you're actually consuming. So the important thing there is to understand that a potential consequence could be consuming a substance and not knowing what's in it, which can be fatal.
Okay, so if somebody wants help, where would they get help? Where should they go?
Yeah, so starting point. So I would say definitely communicate with somebody. Reach out to somebody that's trusted, a family member, a friend. Having support in starting your journey can be very beneficial. If you don't have that support, then there are options like online. You can search up different centers. You can search up Kids Help Phone. You can search up different types of coping numbers. There's also nonprofit organizations that you can go to, shelters that you can go to, and going even to a doctor where referrals can be made, things like that. So I would say draw on as many resources as you can. Turning to a church too, for example, right? So drawing on the social supports that are out there. And if you go online, there are so many different types of supports that will come up. Some can be anonymously speaking to somebody over the phone, if there's that fear of that guilt and that shame.
Yeah.
Right? There's also counseling through video conferencing or through telehealth communication. So that gives you the opportunity to speak to somebody about this if you don't want to do an in-face person-to-person.
Yeah.
Therapists, there's even a lot of therapy centers that do 15-minute free consultations. So you don't have to necessarily book a session, but you can call and have a free consultation and discuss what it is that you're experiencing. Maybe it's hard for you to put a name to it. Maybe the therapist can help guide you on how to best go about that issue. So I would really urge you in searching up these things and drawing on social supports, people within your community, multidisciplinary teams that you have on your belt, such as even your doctor, to learn different ways to go about things. As practitioners, it's our responsibility that if we don't know, we will find out for you. If I don't know something, I will find it out for you. And that's what it's all about. It's all about making people aware of what's available to them. And I think the more we do things like this, having people come in and talk from experience, is very important too.
So my question then will be, is there any cost to seeking for this help? Are there financial costs associated? And could that be also a factor why some people will not seek for help if there is financial cost attached to it?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of the time, yeah, there is financial cost to it, but not all places by any means. There's nonprofit organizations, right? Government-run organizations that are available for no cost. So if that's the route that you're looking for, you can always search up nonprofit. You can search up, support systems without financial attachments to it. And then again, just asking different individuals. So yes, there is a lot of financial to it, but then there are also options that are not necessarily, you have to be financially stable in order to ask for support, right? So I would say doing your research is definitely important in navigating through that. Speaking to people too is definitely very important as well. And yeah, so there definitely are places available that it's not a financial burden. There's no financial cost to it.
So our audience, we have audience that are outside of Canada. So this specifically is for Canada. So does OHIP support any aspect of addiction help at all?
OHIP is Ontario Health System.
So if you want to be looked at by, say, for example, a psychiatrist, you want to be assessed, you would have to go to your doctor, and then that referral would be put in place with your doctor to a psychiatrist. That would be covered by OHIP, and a psychiatrist can help with that process.
Okay.
That's good. That is amazing. My goodness. What a night to remember. We've spoken about all these things. Somebody's listening to you saying, Megan, I think I want to do this, but is there a success rate? What is the success rate at where you work? Is it successful? Is it 2%? Would I waste my time trying to seek help?
So, I mean, the success rate varies, and the success rate also varies in your idea of what success means. So, relapse, but owning that relapse and coming back and trying to maintain that sobriety, in the eyes of some people, that would be a success rate, right? So success rates definitely differ. I don't have a statistical number to give you, but I can definitely get that information for you. And all places are going to have different statistical information, right? In terms of my work, I don't have the exact figure, but I know that the success rate is definitely high, over 50% for sure.
Wow. That's amazing. So at least there is help for you, there is hope for you. And maybe as you are contemplating right now, this is the beginning of a breakthrough for your life. Some people have been through where you've been, and they are out of this situation. I told you when we started, you are not alone. We are not here to push you down. We are here to give you a helping hand. You heard from the therapist the effect of these drugs and what it does to ourselves, our families, externally. It is devastating. If you've come to that point where you need help, reach out, shout, call somebody, talk to somebody, because there is help out there, and don't suffer alone. If you have any questions, you can write, send it to us. We will help to direct you to where we can find help for you. Next week, for instance, we're bringing somebody who deals with the spiritual aspect of substance abuse and addictions. It's going to be another level. Megan brought us the actual aspect of therapy, and it's so informative. I've learned so much. I think if I don't stop this, we're going to go on for the next 3 hours. There's a lot there to hear. But stay tuned and, play this over and over again. Send it to a friend. Let them hear what you have heard. somebody may be trying to, attempting to try some drugs, they need to hear this. That some of us have just one shot, and that's it. It may mess you up. And don't compare yourself with somebody. They have different physiology, they have different DNA, their situation may be different. Yours may be another story. So, as much as you've heard this, don't mess with drugs. They are not for fun. It may look physically as fun, but there is something behind it. There are stories of people who are hurting, families who are devastated, and I pray it will never be your portion. So stay tuned next week. Come back for the other added aspect of the spiritual aspect of therapy. It will be done by a psychotherapist. It's going to be another amazing time. If you've enjoyed this, you will enjoy next week as well. So stay tuned for next week. And at this time, I will ask you, if you have anything to give to this work, this is a good time to give and support the work we are doing. It will be a blessing to you. But to all my panelists, Mommy, she's always been here with all the great questions.
And I hope you missed me in the few weeks I've not been here.
And Megan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And,
You've been so helpful.
And we've learned a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the audience. I appreciate the opportunity for making me feel belong.
You belong. Thank you. Have a good evening and shalom.